You ever watch Game of Thrones? Right? You ever maybe watch like Bridgerton, or at least whatever I imagine Bridgerton to be, The Bachelorette, maybe even The Bachelor. If you're feeling, particularly rambunctious, you can go with the old, like the Golden Bachelor. That seemed like a really good time. Have you ever paid attention to the court politics of ancient Carthage, perhaps the court politics of ancient Persia? All of these things have one thing in common with Preston North End, and that there is a lot of fucking drama. And the you like that? You like that. I liked that. I enjoyed that. There's a weird bit of nonsense that has occurred at Preston North End, and you know me. The reason that I sit here is I've got a nose for nonsense, and I've uncovered some of that nonsense because at Preston North End, a particularly wild managerial move has been made. Now, you'll be sitting here thinking, why are we talking about a managerial move, Zealand? It's August. And if that's something that you are thinking about, then you've probably picked up on exactly why this is so weird. Why, right at the start of the season, am I talking about a managerial move, particularly a managerial move at a pretty high level? Preston North End is a mid-table team in the championship, which means they are within striking distance of Premier League immortality and glory and financial heaven for everybody involved. Right, they have that in their wheelhouse. They haven't been able to get there yet. But in the after match day 42, they were 5 points out of a playoff spot with 4 matches to go. For them, they actually had 5 matches to go because one match got rescheduled. But last year, Preston North End finished the season by losing 5 consecutive matches. I know I have the proof right here. They lost 1-0 to Norwich, 3-0 to Southampton, 1-0 to QPR, 3-0 to Leicester, and 3-0 to West Brom. To be honest, though, Norwich, Southampton, and Leicester are completely understandable losses, and the last match of the season was a push, and who gives a shit about it in the first place, because they were already very safe from relegation and definitely not going to get in the playoffs. So even though they lost the last 5 matches and maybe fumbled a chance to make a run at a playoff spot, by the way, if they'd managed to beat Norwich, they would have been 2 points off a playoff spot going into the last 3 match days. So that, I'm sure, was a heartbreaker. But it's all relevant to this story because Norwich then, not Norwich, Preston South End, West End. Because Preston North End started the season as it finished the previous one. They went through the whole preseason. A preseason, by the way, which included a win over Fiorentina, right? That is nothing to sneeze at. That's an impressive result for Preston North End. It ended, of course, with a loss against Everton, but that's prone to happen. They went up against Sheffield United, which, of course, is one of the better teams in the championship, and they lost 2-0. Again, none of these results are crazy bad, right? You don't look at any of these results and you go, wow, that's the reason to pull the escape cord. And that's the reason to break out the fire extinguishers, call the fire department because something's gone horribly awry. There's a billion games to play in the championship, right? You play every 4 days from the dawn of man until the end of the season. And then maybe you get lucky enough to end up in some sort of savage playoff system for $100 million, which, to be honest, when you mention the $100 million at the end, I'm kind of into it too. Sign me up. I'd be happy to be there. But apparently, the manager of Preston North End is not happy to be there, and neither was the club or anything else, because this statement then drops. And by the way, if you watch the other video that comes out today on this channel, I really appreciate the brevity of this statement. But it's Ryan Lowe leaves Preston North End by mutual consent. Now, normally, when you see the phrase mutual consent, it is somebody getting fired, but they don't want to embarrass them by firing them. And to be fair, Ryan Lowe has managed this team for 2.5 years at this point. But this statement comes out on the 12th of August on the club website. This is 3 days after the result against Sheffield United to start the season, which means this guy managed one match the entire, he got through the whole preseason, the whole offseason, the vast majority of the transfer window, manages one match, and they cut the cord. And there goes Ryan Lowe. He's sailing off into the sunset, no longer the manager of Preston North End. And there's not a lot of details that are made apparent here, but it does sound a little weird from the off, right? Following discussions that took place on Sunday, the 11th August, it was mutually agreed that now is an appropriate time for a change to be made. They basically say who's going to take over, and they kind of wish him the best, but they mention a specific date, and they mention a discussion, which I feel like is a little unusual for this type of statement. You usually don't say that, like, yeah, this was the meeting and this is when we sat down. So I could smell perhaps an extra layer of tomfoolery here, because what we want to get to the bottom of is exactly why a manager is being let go by mutual consent. Now, we're fighting uphill here to prove what we're trying to prove, because mutual consent does, like I was saying, typically mean that somebody is being fired and you just kind of don't want to word it that way. But then we get a message from Ryan Lowe himself. This comes out in the same day, later in the same day. Okay. Ryan Lowe would like to share the following message, the following message following his departure from Preston North End, forthwith. Obviously, as you know, my time at Preston North End has come to an end. I've had an unbelievable 2.5 years, met some incredible people, coached some fantastic players, and I feel now is the right time to move on. Wait, what? 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 I'm sorry. What? I feel now is the right time to move on. Hold on. Don't worry. We're going to get more clarification. I've had an unbelievable time working with Peter Ridsdale over the last 2.5 years. Thank you, Peter, and all the other guys, and giving me the opportunity to manage a fantastic club and establish myself as a championship manager. That strikes me as a bit weird. There's definitely some hubris behind that, being like, thank you for letting me establish myself as a championship pedigree manager, but now fuck off. Like that. I might be reading it wrong, but when you understand the rest of this, he thanks the players, thanks the fans, all the right stuff. Doesn't seem like too much of a dick. But then he says, I think now is the right time for the club to go in a different direction. I've always stressed since I walked through the door that if I can't take the club any further, I'd leave it to someone else, and that's what I'm doing. That paragraph makes it clear that Preston North End is not firing Lowe. He's leaving. So now we're looking at a situation where we have a manager that went through the entirety of the preseason, lost one game to a pretty good team, and then just can't take the club any further. I'm out. Fucking deuces. All right. I'm leaving the club in a good place with a fantastic squad. I mean, look, to be perfectly honest, if you believed that, you wouldn't be fucking leaving, right? Like, what? Right? Like, if you believed that, then you believe yourself to be a championship quality manager, wouldn't you want to try and pursue the Premier League quality manager situation? I'm leaving the club in a good place with a fantastic squad. You're leaving the club in a position where they don't have a manager after the first match of the season, right? A manager that you just took up all the oxygen of the preseason, all of the transfer window, right? Not all of the transfer window, but like 3/4 of the transfer window at least. And you ditched him after one game. My question is, there's only two ways this could have gone. Did he spend the entire offseason thinking that he was probably going to leave soon after the season started? Or was this an unbelievably irrational kind of emotional decision? But I mean, if you're prone to that sort of thing, wouldn't you have left at some point when you weren't able to get into the playoff last year? Like, I don't understand how you actually managed to come to this conclusion. Maybe something that could justify this the most is perhaps something's going on in Ryan Lowe's personal life. Something in his family, something in his life in particular that he wants to keep private. That would be an entirely separate conversation. Outside of that, though, this is just really weird. And I feel like if even that was sort of happening, then you would be saying more sort of stuff in this statement about, I need to take time for myself. It's a really difficult time for me right now, or this and that. I got a lot of stuff going on. I don't want you guys to dig into it. I want you to respect my privacy, but also I want you guys to know that I'm not just leaving you in a lurch here. This is something, there would be a different way to write this statement, which leads me to believe that that's not necessarily what is happening here, which means it's the former, which means we're in a situation where this guy is just leaving his club after one season, which if you're doing this, right, I'm assuming he wants to manager again because he's bragging about how he's now a championship manager, right? Why would you want to hire a guy that is capable of leaving the club after one season, right? And the idea that he's leaving the club after, one season, one game, is reinforced by Peter Ridsdale, who's the director at North End. Peter said, first of all, I wasn't expecting it. Ryan asked to see me yesterday, and I sat down with him, and he said he thought it was time for a change. I mean, this is the director of the club saying that he just got a call from the manager who was like, hey, I need to talk. And the conversation was the manager literally leaving, just deciding that he was out. Obviously, we had a bad end to last season, and we had a difficult game on Friday. I think Ryan just felt it was time to relieve the pressure, go off with his family, and spend some quality time, and that's what he's doing. I mean, cool. Right? But you're trying to go off and have a vacation with your family. You just had the off season, dude. That's what the off season is for. And if you want to take a bigger vacation, right, then you could leave by mutual consent in the off season like every other reasonable manager happens to do. Right? I mean, that's what Pochettino did. That's what a lot of guys, you get to the end of the season and there's like we disagree on the direction we want to take the club and we're just going to kind of do that. Obviously, that leaves this guy with very little choice, and he says we kind of just respected his decision at that point. Now, there is, of course, the possibility that Lowe was trying to beat the boot out the door, basically, and say, I'm not fired, I quit. There's maybe one thing that endorses that thought process, in that Ridsdale mentions, like, I've always got a list of what happens if, and I dusted that down this morning. So saying he has a list of potential managers, if shit hits the fan. And he's like, well, I kind of dusted that down this morning. And maybe that indicates that he had at least started thinking about picking up a new manager. But I mean, we're talking about Preston North End, who finished 10th in the championship last year, and with 4 or 5 matches to go is very much in the playoff race. I would be surprised if this guy didn't have at least a couple of months of a leash to where maybe if the club's in 17th after the first 2 months, he might be getting the boot. But after one match, and I mean, a tough night against Sheffield United where you lose 2-0, it's just crazy. And I try and when I go after these situations, right, I try to wrap my mind around it, look at it from enough perspectives, right? I mean, I'm not some sort of dedicated journalist or anything. I'm just a dude sitting at a computer talking about stuff. But I try and at least understand how something could happen or why it could be happening. And outside of the potential serious family issues for Lowe here, there is no good explanation that makes that makes Ryan Lowe not look terrible, right? Like there's just not a good explanation that makes Ryan Lowe look like he's doing anything other than just leaving his club that he managed for 2.5 years, and the players and the director and any other people that he was working with just in a lurch. I mean, we are one match into the season, and you had all preseason to yourself that's what blows my mind the most is preseason's that formative time. You get to know the players and you kind of get into the swing of things. It's why managerial changes right after the season are important, because you're able to bring in a new manager who can run the whole preseason and get a full grasp of the club. And now somebody's going to be putting on their waders and jumping into the deep end, trying to steer Preston North End for the rest of the season and learn everybody's name while playing a match every 4 days. It's just not healthy. As for Preston North End, they ended up hiring Mr. Paul Heckingbottom, I believe it is. Yeah, there you go. Paul Heckingbottom was hired, and he did his first interview with Preston North End 5 hours ago. So he was able to narrow that list down pretty quickly and make a hire within a week, which I would assume is going to keep Preston North End maybe rolling in the right direction. But just, I mean, Ryan Lowe, WYD, brother. WYD.